Hey, it's Stuart Sutton at 1 Acre Plus Homes. Hope you're having a fantastic day. This video is going to cover 5 major traps that buyers and buyers agents try to put you into. We all know about traps from all areas of life. The number one for me might be my marriage. No, it's a fantastic marriage, but my wife does trap me sometime. I don't think she does it on purpose. I think it's my fault. But her biggest trap is, did you notice? And when she asked me that, I know I didn't notice because I would have said something. She would have known I noticed, so she wouldn't have to ask the question. I remember one time I thought I was going to avoid that trap. I'd walked into the utility room and we had a pegboard where we hung some things up. And as I hung things up on the pegboard to go into the kitchen, I glanced up. And I don't do that very often, but I glanced up and there were these cute little baskets. Our utility room in that house had a sink and a refrigerator, washer, dryer, some cabinets and the pegboard. And I looked up and there were these cute little baskets hanging around the perimeter of the utility room up near the ceiling. And I thought, well, that really looks kind of nice. It kind of dresses up the utility room, which in itself is not what you would call a cute room. But I wandered into the kitchen, found my wife and said, hey, sweetie, those baskets really look nice. When did you do that? Thinking, I've avoided the trap. I noticed this. She looked at me with that look where I knew I hadn't avoided the trap. And she said 3 years ago. So that's my trap. You may have different ones, but my trap is, have you noticed? It's funny though, because in real estate, I notice pretty much everything. I really don't miss much, but we're going to show you how to avoid traps. Let me get right to it. The first one is one that we've all experienced, maybe in other areas as well, but in real estate, the low ball offer. Them throwing an offer at you with a big discount. The trap is this. Most of these buyers or buyers agents want you to respond by coming down a little more than you might have otherwise, just to try to make it work. So if you get a low offer, my advice is simply this. Counter as if it were a really good offer. I'm just going to throw some numbers out. Let's just say you're on the market at $750 and you get an offer for $690. Well, that's $60,000 difference and halfway is $720. You don't want to jump down to $720. If you get an offer for $690 and you're asking $750, you might counter at $740 or $742.5, $739. Bottom line is that you want to make sure that they understand that you have a good value. Your price is good. What they're trying to do is see if they can get you to come below where you normally would. I'll give you an example of one where this paid off well. I had a home, this is many years ago. It was priced at $500, probably be worth $1.3 million today. But we got an offer for $400. Of course, the seller was very upset. Said, tell them to take a hike. We're not going to address this. And that's what a lot of sellers do. And I think it's a bad strategy by buyers to do that. But we stepped back and I said, let's just address this as if it were a good offer. Now, we know that our price is good when you know you have a wonderful property and you've got some attributes most properties don't have. They had a very high-end pool and you just weren't going to find one like that anywhere else. So we countered at $495. Remember, asking $500, offer $400, we countered at $495. Well, they countered back at $425. Well, we stayed at $495. They came up to $450. We stayed at $495. They came up to $475. And then they accepted $495 and closed. And upon inquiring about why they did that, the agent said, well, they just wanted to see. I mean, she said the last purchase they made, the seller came way down and they felt like they got a really good deal. And they thought they'd try it on this one. So they were just trying that. Now, I will admit to you also that when you get that low of an offer, a lot of times it's never going to go anywhere. But it's worth trying. Don't just set it aside and ignore it. I hope that makes sense. But if you get an offer that's a little lower than typical, counter as if it were a good offer and counter where you were going to anyway. Don't settle down to halfway hoping they'll meet you because they probably won't. But every situation's different. Talk to your agent about how you want to counter and go from there. Another trap they try to put you into is hurry up. We need an answer. Hurry up. We need an answer. We've got other houses we want to see. We've got another house we want to make an offer on. That's fairly common. And it makes the seller feel like They really need to respond. They need to respond quickly, and they need to respond aggressively in order not to lose that buyer. Now, I'm here to tell you that that is often not really a truthful position. They're just saying that in order to try to get you to make a quick response and come down to as close as possible to where they're at, because they're putting you in a position of feeling like you'll lose them as a buyer if you don't make them a good counter offer. Now, I will fully admit, there are times when that might be true, but I've seen it used as a ploy so many times, I think it's worth warning you about. So, do you need to not hurry? Well, you might want to go ahead and say, look, we'll give you a quick answer, but again, make your quick answer a good, reasonable counter offer based on what you're asking. And don't let their hurry up attitude make you leave money on the table. I hope that makes sense. Another little trap is what I call the little things, and that is where they ask you to do everything in the contract, pay every little fee that's negotiable, and that adds up. Now, it doesn't add up to a tremendous amount, but it does get a little annoying when every little fee is extra or it's paid by you when sometimes it's normal for the buyer to pay it. And bottom line is, when you get to where you see your net, it's down some because you're paying all the little fees in the contract. Just do the math. You might consider leaving those all in place and just compensating for that in your counter price so that you're making up the difference in paying those items. You see, dollars are dollars. What do you care if you get an offer for $100 and you're asking $110? Or if you get an offer for $110 and they ask you to pay $10 in closing costs? It's still the same thing. So don't be one of those sellers who says, well, I'm not paying closing costs for the buyers. Well, you might. I mean, it might be a viable situation. I've seen many situations where the buyer needed and wanted closing costs paid on their behalf. You see this with veteran buyers quite often, VA buyers, but they still give you an offer that's acceptable even after you consider the closing costs being paid on your behalf. Again, dollars are dollars. So if you're netting about the same amount, whether you're paying closing costs or not, what does it really matter how the contract itself is structured? I hope that makes sense. And this is another one that's common, where the agent comes in and says, well, you know what, the buyer's going to need to do certain things. Well, if you've already taken that into account, your agent just simply needs to show them how you took that into account and why it's already been a matter that you have considered. Now, there are two different types of improvements, in my opinion. One is legitimate repairs, and if that's the case, you probably already know about it if you're prepared. But if it's simply updates and improvements that modernize the house, that's the buyer's choice. If it's taste, they'd rather have wood than carpet. That is normal in today's market, or they'd rather have quartz than granite, whatever the case is. If what you're offering is acceptable within the market, then there's no reason for you to take a discount because of the upgrades they want to make. Now, if what you have is truly outdated based on today's market, that's a different story. But again, you'll know that in advance before the contract comes in. And keep in mind, buyers nearly always overestimate the cost of improvements, so be sure that you understand what they're asking and know where those costs should be rather than just taking their estimate for it. I had a buyer one time, a buyer's agent actually. This is an interesting story. Well, it's interesting to me. The buyer's agent said, my buyer has done all the research and it will cost $50,000 to replace that septic system. Well, in reality, the septic system did need to be replaced, and we knew that. But we already had a hard bid, and we shared that with them. They should have already seen it because it was online. But our hard bid was $27,000, and that's by one of the most reputable septic installation companies in the area. So buyers nearly always overestimate what a cost will be. So be sure that you understand what cost will be. If you have improvements that you know the buyer is going to need to make, it's smart to already have those bids in hand. And here's another one. A lot of times the buyer's agent will say, well, you know, we looked at the comps and we feel your value is about here. Now, in typical subdivisions, that might make a little bit more sense. But in the 1 acre plus market, determining a value of a property is not as easy as simply a subdivision house. So if they feel like their offer is based on comps, I would want to see those comps. And I would want to address the comparables and make adjustments as necessary. Because I can look at comps, since I've seen most of the houses on the market, most of the sales in the market, and say, well, here's how this one differed, here's how that one differed, here's our comps, and here's why we feel the value is where it is. So the counter should be based on your comps and your confidence in where the value is. Now, I'm not telling you in any and all of these cases to do things an exact way. It's situational. You may want to say, hey, you know what? I want to take that offer. It's time for me to move on. That's entirely up to you. But if you are confident in your price, you're confident in your value, and the market is responding, these traps are to try to get you down lower than you should. And there's no reason to do that if you recognize what the buyers and buyer's agents are doing. And you'll probably learn how to recognize these traps much faster than I learned my wife's trap of, did you notice? So good luck with that. I did put another video up here for you. This one talks about the 5 main reasons homes don't sell. This is something you ought to pay attention to if you're thinking, or someone you know is thinking about selling their home on an acre or more anytime soon. Hit that like button if you like this video. Subscribe if you'd like to see more. And remember, it's your choice. Make it a powerful day.